Welcome to another episode of Let the Quran Speak. Peace and blessings be upon all of you. Last week we talked about early Islamic history. This week we'll be talking about the first battle in Islam. So Brother Shabir, to get straight into it, the first battle of Islam, the Battle of Badr. At one point in history did this battle occur?
This occurred in the second year of the Hijrah, and just to give some perspective about what all this means, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, began preaching his message in his hometown. He did so for about 13 years after first receiving the call, but there he was persecuted, and so he sent many of his followers to escape this persecution by moving to Abyssinia in one wave after another. Then he himself migrated away from that scene of violence to take up safe haven in another city called Yathrib at the time, now renamed the City of the Prophet, or just City for short, Medina in Arabic. There he lived in relative peace for at least a year, but it was in the second year of his having taken up safe and peaceful residence there that he had to confront the enemy in this defensive struggle.
Okay, so what was the cause of this battle, I guess? As in, like, who initiated the fight? Were the Muslims responding, attacking, and so forth?
In the classical and biographical literature about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the general outlook was one of violence. We find that the classical biographers celebrated violence as a method of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So they conceived of this battle as having been initiated by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself, as though he provoked the enemy. They thought that he got news of the well-laden caravan that belonged to the Quraysh, his tribespeople, coming back home from its trading journey to Syria. And that he expected that this would be an easy opportunity for him to regain some of the property that had been taken from him and his early followers, because recall that he and his followers were persecuted in Mecca for many years. And eventually, when he migrated away, he had to leave his possessions behind. So they thought that it was legitimate for him to reclaim his possessions, at least some of it, by attacking this passing caravan. And this is how it is laid out in all of the classical biographies of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Okay, so is that the truth, or like how does it work?
An Indian scholar within the last 100 years or so, Allama Shibli Nomani, has written a very extensive biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the Urdu language, and translations of much of it is now available in English. And he has analyzed the classical records in great depth, and in his analysis, he finds that general picture is incorrect. Because everyone agrees that the Quran is the most authentic record about the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, more authentic than the biographies which were written about him, because the biographies were written much later in the second and mostly the third century of Islam. The earliest biography we have of the Prophet, peace be upon him, now was written by a certain man, Ibn Ishaq, who died around the year 150. That's in the second century. And the recension we have of it is written by a person who came later, Ibn Hisham, who died in the year 220, so that's in the third century. Whereas the Quran is agreed upon to be contemporaneous with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So if it mentions some biographical detail about him, that must be taken as being authentic, even if one doesn't accept that this is a revelation from God, but it's mentioned something about the life of the Prophet. It must be something that actually occurred the way it is being described in the Quran.
Okay.
Now, what Allama Shibli Nomani points to in particular is that in Surah 8 of the Quran, which speaks about this battle, in verse number 7, there is a mention of a disputation between the Prophet, peace be upon him, and some of his followers. Now, that disputation, according to the classical picture, the way it was given in the biographies, would have occurred after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, already had gone out from the city and was out with the intention to attack the caravan. And then later on, he heard the news that the Quraysh had sent a large army to come and defend the caravan.
Okay.
And this is when a disputation arose between him and his followers as to whether they should proceed now, knowing that this large army is coming to defend the caravan, or whether they should return peacefully to their town.
Okay.
And the Quranic verse, on the other hand, shows that this disputation already occurred before the Prophet, peace be upon him, had left town.
Okay.
So Allama Shibli Nomani is pointing out that since, according to the Quran, this disputation occurred before the Prophet, peace be upon him, left town, then the only disputed matter was whether we are going to go out to meet that large army. And that shows that it wasn't the Prophet's intention to go and attack a caravan. This was never an option. What confronted the Muslims is the fact that a large army is coming to attack them from the south. And are they going to go out to meet that army, or what are they going to do? And people are afraid of what to do. But the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, leads them out to go and defend the city from the outskirts. You don't wait in your city for the army to enter, because then they rape and pillage and murder and burn. So you go out to meet them. And though they were few in number, the Prophet, peace be upon him, had faith in God that he can go out and meet them, and with God's help, he will be successful in defending his city.
Okay, so you mentioned it a little bit, but what were the resources that were available to the Prophet, peace be upon him, in comparison to the Meccans?
The resources were very few. Apart from his trust in God, I don't see any reason why he would actually want to go and face the enemy like this. It is reported that they had some 70 persons among them altogether, rather some 313 persons altogether, and they only had 70 camels on which to ride and 2 horses, whereas the enemy was fully equipped. They had horses to spare, and they were far greater in number. There were 1,000 strong as opposed to 313 of the Muslims, and they were well equipped and ready for battle, whereas the Prophet, peace be upon him, had just, you can say, an ad hoc group of people.
So what was the morale of the Muslims in that circumstances, as in like their attitude and so forth?
Well, naturally, they would have been scared. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, filled with faith in God, was ready to go forth with this trust in God. But others who were new to the faith, this is why they were disputing with him. Why should we go out? Why don't we just surrender from the start? Because it seemed like a hopeless situation. But the Prophet, peace be upon him, marched out to meet them at a place called Badr, and this is why it comes to be known as the Battle of Badr.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll be back after the break, and we'll be discussing more about the lessons of the first battle of Islam, the Battle of Badr.